Welcome to the Level 2 training module for Core Requirement 5, Tracking Throughput, which explains the fundamentals of this section in greater detail. While the intention of this training module is to increase understanding of R2 requirements, it is not intended to be used as a standalone guide. For the official text of all R2 requirements, download the R2 v3 standard from the SERI website. The general principle of Core Requirement 5 is to track and manage the throughput of all electronic equipment, components, and materials, and maintain sufficient records to document the flow of all electronic equipment, components, and materials. Core Requirement 5 identifies three distinct stages of the tracking process. The first is tracking inbound equipment or materials as it enters the facility or enters the control of the facility. For instance, tracking from the time a facility arranges for transportation of an incoming order. Next is tracking the in-process volumes to ensure quantities are processed within required timeframes and do not exceed legal or closure plan limits. And the third stage is tracking outbound equipment or material streams. Throughput tracking applies to all electronic equipment, components, and materials that are controlled by an R2 facility, including items that may not physically pass through the facility. In the definitions of the R2 standard, control begins at the point where and when an R2 facility takes title, physical possession, or contractual obligation for electronic equipment, components, and materials, regardless of ownership. For example, at a collection or customer site when the R2 facility physically or contractually takes possession of the items. Control also applies to other locations managed or controlled by the facility, such as an additional warehouse or collection site. And control extends to external operations controlled by the facility, such as brokering or sales. Each stage in the tracking process will have its own unique set of records. In order to be effective, records must be complete and clearly demonstrate the flow of each stream of equipment, components, and materials at each stage in the tracking process. Tracking and managing the inbound flow to the facility is usually straightforward and typically already part of a facility's operation. The first step is to clearly identify what enters the facility. Sometimes identification will be simple. For example, an ITAD facility that purchases used equipment might receive a list of every asset on the shipment before it arrives at the warehouse. Identifying other types of shipments may not be so easy, such as when a materials recovery facility receives gaylords filled with mixed types of electronics that may not have weights or other quantities assigned to them. Remember, any item or shipment that is bought, sold, picked up, dropped off, delivered, or brokered is required to be recorded and accounted for, whether it physically passes through the R2 facility, is diverted from one of the facility's collection centers, or is brokered from a customer directly to a downstream vendor. Core Requirement 5 requires facilities to keep detailed records of all inbound transactions. These records should include accurate dates, detailed descriptions including types and quantities of all materials received, and supplier names. Auditors will examine these supporting records as evidence of inbound transactions. Records may include invoices, packing lists, bills of lading, or other commercial documents. In addition to maintaining records for each incoming shipment, facilities are also required to keep a summary report of all inbound transactions. The summary report provides transparency for everything managed by the facility. When tracking inbound transactions, be aware that the terminology used by the supplier may provide only a generic description of the equipment or materials actually shipped. Relying solely on a supplier description without verifying the actual contents can lead to inaccurate tracking and processing. For example, a shipment marked as computers may actually be many different streams of materials, including motherboards, batteries, hard drives, and LCD screens, each needing different management. Or a shipment labeled batteries may contain multiple types, each requiring a different type of processing. Or a shipment labeled scrap metal may actually be a gaylord of satellite TV boxes containing focus materials. When supplier descriptions do not adequately describe the contents of shipments, an R2 facility will need to clarify and provide more detail about the actual contents. In addition to tracking inbound and outbound throughput, Core 5 also includes requirements for managing in-process inventory levels. This is to ensure that R2-controlled streams are properly identified, tracked, and inventoried throughout the entire process, from receipt to shipment. Maximum inventory quantities must be defined in the facility's closure plan and may also need to be identified as regulatory requirements outlined in the facility's legal compliance plan. Remember, inventory tracking and limits must include all other locations under the control of the R2 facility, such as at collection points, other warehouses, and equipment brokered directly to downstream vendors. R2v3 does not specify the method of tracking inventory. Tracking methods can differ from facility to facility depending on the type of operation. While inventory software can make this task easier, it can also be done manually. Core 5 also has specific inventory time limits for negative value streams and R2 controlled streams. For negative value streams, where the cost to manage is greater than the value of the items or materials, careful tracking and inventory controls are especially critical. Facilities must ensure that negative value streams are processed in a timely manner. To prevent stockpiling, Core 5 explicitly prohibits storage of R2 controlled streams and negative value materials for longer than 1 year. It does, however, allow refurbishers certified to Appendix C to keep spare parts for use in repairs as long as they've been evaluated and inventoried for future use. This applies only to parts and components and does not include whole units that are not functional. The final part of tracking throughput is documenting outbound transactions, everything that leaves the facility or its control. This stage also includes collecting detailed records to support each transaction. Some of the supporting evidence of outbound shipments will be similar to those used for tracking inbound shipments, such as bills of lading, but it may also include a variety of other commercial documents depending on the different types of transactions. For instance, direct online sales may not generate a BOL, but would likely be shipped as a parcel and instead have a mail or courier delivery record. Also keep in mind that transactions are not always shipments. If a customer picks up a device from a retail store, for example, the record could be a sales invoice or something similar, but it would not be a bill of lading. While the R2 standard requires details on outbound transactions, such as types and quantities of items, this information may not always be on a BOL. Sometimes the details will be on a packing list or an invoice. The R2 standard does not specify the exact documents that must be gathered. It is flexible to fit the delivery methods of a variety of different business models. The key is to provide the details and supporting evidence necessary to track the flow of throughput, whether those details are contained in a single document or in multiple documents. In addition to shipping records, a good practice used by some facilities is to take pictures showing the type of material, condition, and general quality leaving the facility. These details supplement the shipping documents and other commercial records. A summary report of all outbound transactions is also required. Tracking of throughput can be done manually or by using an inventory tracking software system. International transfers or movements will likely require additional records such as the booking confirmations, seaway or airway bills, required legal declarations, and any other necessary authorizations or permits. International shipping requirements must be defined in the facility's legal compliance plan as required in Core 4. Facility compliance must be demonstrated with appropriate records. To summarize, details matter. In order to effectively track its throughput, an R2 facility must maintain accurate records of all inbound, in-process, and outbound equipment and materials. The records collected may vary depending on the type of equipment or materials and the stage in the tracking process. The key is to have the details necessary to clearly demonstrate the flow of each material stream, whether that's done with a single document or with multiple documents. This transparency will promote confidence that the equipment and materials controlled by an R2 facility are accurately tracked and directed to the next appropriate R2 processing steps. For more information about the R2v3 standard, visit the R2 Knowledge Base on the SERI website.